Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We're super excited for today's episode, but before we dig into that, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to our newest Patreon supporter, Emily. Thank you so much for supporting the show. And the World Wanderers podcast is brought to you by you, the listeners of the podcast. And in return for becoming a Patreon supporter, you get awesome extra bonuses. So if that sounds like something that you want to get involved with, you can visit theworldwanderers.com/Patreon. And thank you in advance for your support.
So today on the show, we are taking off to Myanmar. Myanmar is kind of I was going to say the forgotten country of Southeast Asia, but becoming more and more so popular, but definitely kind of a bit secondary to that main route people take through Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam.
Yeah, and I think that that's mostly because of, in the past, how difficult it's been to enter. Now it's quite easy. You can sign up for an e-visa. It's $50 to get it. There's only certain ports you can enter with, but tourism is now a lot more welcome in Myanmar, whereas, 10 years ago, tourism was not welcome. It was quite difficult, quite challenging to get a tourist visa. Even the last time we were in Southeast Asia, I remember people asked us, are you going to go to Myanmar? It's kind of the first time I became familiar with, Myanmar, Burma as being the same place. I didn't really know much about the history of them at all. All I knew was that it was challenging to get in, and we didn't really have the time to do that. So we just skipped it.
Yeah, so for a bit of background, since the 1950s, Burma has been ruled by a military dictatorship. Previous to that, it was British rule, and then for a time in World War II, the Japanese took over, and the British came back, and the Burmese finally got control of their country, and the military dictatorship took it over again. And so a very repressive socialist government that has really kept Burma locked in the past until the mid-2000s, when they started some economic liberalization and really started to open things up for tourism. So today, where it's possible to get a tourist visa very easily, like Amanda said, an e-visa, but there's still many areas of the country which are restricted and you can't actually go to.
Yeah, we don't often buy guidebooks anymore when we travel, but Myanmar felt like a place that would be good to have a lot more information on. We both read Finding George Orwell in Burma, which is something that I would highly recommend if you're going there. And then we had this Myanmar guidebook, which was kind of our lifeline for a lot of our trip, because tourism's only really a couple years old. And so it's hard to find information through blogs or websites or even forums. A lot of it's quite outdated, and the country's changing so fast. I was talking to a friend who even went just a couple years ago, and she said there were no ATMs. US dollars had to be all very crisp, and that's something that you'll read about quite a bit. Yet our experience there was that there was ATMs every town that we went to, every city that we visited, and yeah, US dollars do have to be newer, I think 2013 and above, but they're not quite as particular as they were a couple years ago. Yeah,
and even things like fees and prices, where you'll go in your guidebook and it'll say, to go to the temples of Bagan, there's a fee of, 15,000 kyat. And you get there and it's 25,000 kyat. So everything's changing very quickly. And yeah, we'll talk more about the services and stuff that we encountered in the episode, but country that's becoming more and more popular on the tourist circuit, and a really interesting place to go visit.
Yeah, so I thought a good place to start would be for us to talk a little bit about why we decided to go to Myanmar on this trip. Because Myanmar doesn't really fit with sort of being digital nomads, working and traveling. What was sort of the motivation there? So
the plan for us going to Myanmar was kind of a travel break from our settled spots. So we had spent a month in Chiang Mai just kind of focusing on work, and then we were going to go to Myanmar. We were there for 16 days just to travel and explore. And yeah, I can't remember when it first kind of came up as we want to go here. When we're in Asia.
Think before we even left for Asia, once we had flights, Myanmar was a place that was on my list of places that I really wanted to go this time around.
Yeah, why did you want to go to Myanmar?
Well, I'd heard some really good things about it, and especially after we went to the TBEX conference in Manila, I heard a lot more stuff about it. It's kind of interesting, and we can either dig into this now or dig into it a little bit later, but there's people will say things like, you need to go now before it changes too much. You need to go now and experience like the authentic culture. And I kind of was like, okay, I need to go now.
So you kind of like bought into that.
Yeah. I've shifted my mindset on that a little bit just after having seen how repressed people are. I think that it should be changing. That means that people can make more money. But I heard that it was a really, really fantastic country to visit, and I felt like I don't know the next time I'll be in Asia after this trip, so why not do it now? Why not see it while tourism's still early and have that experience and be able to go back a couple years later and have something to really compare with, I guess.
Yeah, and for me, I think you were the driving force. If I was here by myself, I wouldn't have gone to Myanmar. In the last time we were in Southeast Asia, that really sparked my interest in kind of the politics and history of Southeast Asia. We mentioned on our Cambodia episode that we hadn't been introduced to Cambodian history through our experience in school in Canada. So our trip to Cambodia really opened my eyes there. And then when we were in Thailand, I had been introduced to the book Finding George Orwell in Burma. And that really opened my eyes to this country I'd never really thought or heard anything about in the past. I read a number of other books about issues with, smaller ethnic groups in Burma and the struggles they were going through, and these people who were refugees in other countries. And so all of my information about Burma had come from this like dark side of it. So I was quite hesitant about going there. I wasn't really like strongly like, no, we shouldn't go there. But I also wasn't like, okay, this is the place that I want to go travel.
Yeah. Because
my view of it was all of this information about the issues that go on there.
Yeah. Did you not want to have that experience?
What experience?
Like experiencing a country that's like so out of your comfort zone.
Well, so I feel like it's just, I felt slightly uncertain about, I don't have a problem with going somewhere that's out of my comfort zone. I think that's good. Just going to a country where you know the government's committing like massive amounts of crimes, has committed massive amounts of crime, and you're just like, oh, am I supporting this government? Or as a tourist going there and taking a whole bunch of photos and like, oh, look how beautiful this sunset is, look how beautiful these children are. Is that really the right thing to do? Or is it just to say like, I'm not going to go?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's an interesting thing to talk about. We kind of, tried to dabble at the entire concept of this in our dark tourism episode. I don't know if Myanmar as a country is necessarily considered dark tourism, but I think that it could be in some ways because its history is so awful. And then, there's still war happening in the country. I mean, tourists are really limited to where they go. It's not as limited as somewhere like North Korea. Like, you do have quite a bit more freedom when you're going around, but there's places like you can see in a guidebook or on any map that you look at that there's places you cannot go as a foreigner.
Yeah, and there's groups of people there who are still really having a lot of issues with the government. And like there's people who say like, oh, there's still like genocide happening in Myanmar.
Yeah, and Myanmar's government doesn't like allow people to see that. Like, you can't get journalism visas to go into those areas. They don't allow foreign aid workers to come in. So it's really stuff that's happening that it's really hard to find out about, which is something that I found like the most is interesting or crazy or devastating when I was reading Finding George Orwell in Burma. I think that, we talked a lot about sort of the government situation, if it was something we were comfortable with before making our decision to go. Something that I kind of came to is like, I think that it's important for people to recognize or to realize or to experience what's going on in another country. I don't know if you necessarily, I think you get like tastes of it while you're in Myanmar, for sure. Like, you see how set back in the past they are and how poor people are.
Yeah, and I think the thing about North Korea is that like it's so controlled and that you have very little access to engaging with everyday people. At least that's my impression of what it's like to go there. Whereas Myanmar, it's like there's it's not the whole country, but there's quite a large area that is opened up to tourists, and you can go to a lot of different areas. And they really have opened it up in the last 10 years to a point where I feel like it's kind of like a floodgate type thing where I don't think there's any going back. And it's, people have really good data access now, and they can get on the internet, and they can get on YouTube, and they're engaging with all these Westerners who are coming to visit there. And we'll talk about it later as we get into the episode, but
I think we're well into the episode.
Yeah, you do have this experience of seeing how much the country is changing in a positive way. So I think overall it's hard to say, but I feel like it is a net positive to go and to help support the tourist economy as it grows, and introduce new ideas and new opportunities to people there.
Yeah, definitely. So we did a fairly common loop through Myanmar. We flew into Yangon, started in Yangon, went to the Golden Rock, which is a little bit off the beaten path, but definitely still something that's popular amongst tourists. From there, we went up to Inlay Lake, over to Mandalay, Mandalay to Bagan, Bagan back to Mandalay, and then we flew out. So in this episode, we're going to take you through some of those experiences. And we took our portable recorder along with us. We've got lots of live data for how we were feeling right in the moment. And hopefully that'll give you a great experience as to what Myanmar was like for us.
So we arrived in Yangon late at night, checked into our guest house, woke up, and then spent our first day exploring the city. And we do a check-in clip from the largest pagoda in Yangon, Shwedagon Pagoda. And just as a forewarning, we murder the pronunciation of many words in this episode.
Yeah, we do our best to pronounce them as they're supposed to be pronounced, and
I don't even know.
Our best is not good.
I don't know if that's a fair thing to say.
I mean, I tried 3 times in the first clip to try and get it right, and I still don't think it's good. And we've Google translated it, and we still don't have it. So, yeah, like Ryan said, we meet you at the biggest pagoda in Yangon and Myanmar in general. So we're currently at the Shwedagon, the largest pagoda in Yangon. So we have made it to Myanmar, and we're ending our first day with a sunset over the pagoda. What's sort of your first day in Myanmar been like?
It's been pretty crazy. We didn't have a great sleep last night. We had a big travel day yesterday, and then it's just warm, busy, a lot going on in Yangon as you walk around during the day.
Yeah. So, yeah, we've been pretty tired today just because full-on travel day. We left Chiang Mai in the morning. We had a couple hours in Bangkok. We switched airports. We dropped our bags off in storage. And then we boarded a flight to Yangon. Arrived quite late at night. Literally just went from the airport to the guest house. And getting up this morning was like, who knows what we're going to encounter when we step into the streets. Something that I found is that it wasn't actually as busy as I had anticipated.
So what were you expecting?
I don't know, maybe like India busy?
Wow.
I don't know. I have no idea. I have no basis for that. I actually found it quite slow and a little bit sleepy in a lot of places.
Yeah, it was, if you go in kind of the old center of town where a lot of the old government buildings were, almost like a post-apocalyptic vibe in some spots.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's a lot of colonial buildings that are kind of just not kept at all. They're very dirty, they're very run down. They're pretty beautiful though, if you can kind of look past the grunge and the grime. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, they're attractive in that there's overgrown vines on them, and the paint's peeling off.
The architecture itself is really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's colonial. Something that we saw, one of the buildings we saw was a telegraph office, which I thought was really interesting because in a lot of ways, coming to Myanmar is kind of like stepping into the past in some ways. Like, it feels very outdated and old, just walking through the airport with the carpet, then arriving at our guest house where the furniture all seems quite old and not modern. Like, modern is not a word I'd use to describe anything I've seen thus far, which makes sense.
Oh yeah, it's an extremely poor country.
Very repressed country as well. What else has anything been different than you expected it to be?
Yeah, maybe just a bit hotter than I expected. Or I didn't really think about it, but it's pretty overwhelmingly hot during the day. Yeah, I feel like feels quite safe walking around. We're both I'm excited to get out of Yangon and go. We're going to do a tour tomorrow, so that would be interesting. But then, to see some other stuff.
Yeah, so we're going to finish up here at the pagoda. The sun is now set. It's getting dark, and it's all gold and lit up, so it's super beautiful. We're going to make our way to dinner with some friends, and then we will check in tomorrow with our tour. So something that was kind of interesting about our first day in Yangon, well, two things actually, was one, we felt really uncertain as to if it was okay to have our portable recorder out because we entered on a tourist visa. We didn't enter with a journalism visa or anything like that. And the country has been very, very strict about that in the past. So we spent our whole first day kind of just like playing it safe, keeping the portable recorder inside my purse. That's why we didn't check in until the end of the first day.
Yeah, but it sounds kind of ridiculous at first, but when you actually look into some of the stuff that goes on in Myanmar, if they think you're a journalist, that's not a good thing. And even things as simple as there's a story about a tourist who unplugged a speaker because it was playing loud chanty music very late at night, which we'll talk about. He unplugged it and got, I think, sentenced to quite a long time in hard labor. And I think a journalist would be way worse than that if you're there undocumented and they think you're a journalist. So we were very nervous about it. Yeah, definitely. And as a foreigner, you already stand out. People are already kind of looking at you. They're already kind of interested in you. And everyone was very interested in a nice, polite way. The Myanmar people are very, very nice people from our entire experience over our 16 days in Myanmar. But there is just a certain level of discomfort around recording too much in public. So we kind of played it safe that first day. And something that we didn't talk about in that first clip was the electricity. It was really interesting landing in Yangon. We arrived at night, like we've talked about. And as we were touching down, I had a window seat and I'm looking out and there's flashing, twinkling lights all over the place and really unstable twinkling lights. It was actually very beautiful. And I turned to Ryan. I was like, what's going on? I've never seen anything like this before landing in a city. And we go through immigration. We go to get our SIM cards and boom, electricity goes out in the airport. This is the biggest airport in the country. The Yangon International. In the biggest city. Yeah. If there's anywhere with power in the country, it's, the airport in Yangon. Yeah, or at least it should be. Yeah. And it goes out. And so I asked the woman, does this happen a lot? And she kind of just gives me this adorable smile and says, oh, all the time. You'll get used to it. And that was kind of our first, okay, we're into our knees and we're doing this thing. And so something that we found as we went throughout the country is that a lot of big hotels, a lot of places run off generators. You see generators all over the place in Myanmar because electricity is really, really unstable. And it was one of my first experiences in a place where electricity was that unstable, especially in the last couple of years. I mean, as somebody who grew up in Canada, that was never a concern that I had, even when I was a child, growing up in the late 80s. I guess I was born in 89. I hardly grew up in the 80s. Growing up in the 90s was, you don't worry about electricity as a Canadian. So I was like, wow, this is, quite a bit of a culture shock despite having traveled 50 countries. Yeah, and right off the first half an hour we were there, so didn't take long to get that. Yeah, for sure. So we had booked a tour through Urban Adventures for day 2, and Just a day tour. Yeah, just a day tour. And Urban Adventures is a company that we just recently learned about, and they really focus their experiences on doing more off the beaten path type thing, focusing on experiencing
a tour that covers more of a local perspective or has more of a local feel for it. So we were super excited for our tour, and we check in at the end of day 2 and give you a recap of what our tour was like and our thoughts on Yangon. So we are back after our 7-hour tour today. Our tour started out from one of the hotels that's right downtown Yangon, and then we made our way to the circular Yangon train station. And the circular train.
But yeah, the normal train station.
The normal train station, and then we took the circular train.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the circular train actually runs exactly like it sounds, in a circle around the sort of rural parts of Yangon. And it was pretty eye-opening to see that.
Yeah, well, it just runs around all of Yangon. But you get quite a while out of the city, and it really changes the way things look. Even like 10 minutes on the train. And the train is interesting as well. It's super old. Pretty mal-repair. The whole thing was set up while the British were still here, and a lot of the trains still look like they're from that era. So you hop on, it's really slow. The doors are open. It's kind of like Indian style, where people are hopping off before the train stops and hopping on once it's started. Yeah,
I've been really surprised during the first 2 days in Myanmar about how much it has reminded me of what I would expect India to be like. And obviously, we haven't been to India, but we've read about it and seen things about it and talked to people about it, and it is got sort of like an India atmosphere to it a little bit. But something that was great about the tour was that we went with Urban Adventures, which is a branch of Intrepid. We had one guide for 4 people, so we were able to ask a ton of questions, and we got a ton of information from our guide. He told us a lot about the history of Myanmar, the Myanmar people, the language, the culture, the ways of the people, and I felt like that was very interesting.
And then, so the main stop was to a fresh market, which is actually quite a ways out of town. It's like a wholesale local market. There was hardly any other. Basically, we were the only 4 Westerners there, it seemed like. But a giant market full of all sorts of interesting stuff.
It's like Burmese-style Costco.
Yeah, but it's just like a sea of tents, essentially, or umbrellas covering vendors selling everything from chicken organs to shrimp paste to fruit and veg.
Yeah, we saw a ton of different fruit and vegetables, lots that we would find at supermarkets back home. And our guide was telling us how the supermarket that's in sort of downtown Yangon isn't really used for fruits and vegetables. So the people who shop at this large market that's sort of on the outskirts of the city are people who come back, who take the fruits and vegetables and spices and herbs and fish paste and meat and stuff to the local markets, and then that's where the people would go in the mornings and the evenings to get their food for the day or for the week. It's pretty interesting to see all these people waiting kind of around the railroad tracks and even on the railroad tracks for the train to come, and then the train showed up to leave and everyone just piled on with all their goods.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, really. The train was so late.
Like
it
an
runs
hour?
so slow. It would take your entire day, essentially, to go out here, get stuff, and come back. But it's just kind of like indicative of a bit of the pace of life here, just how slow things go.
Yeah, and as we were training on our way back to Yangon, so on the downside of the circle, I guess, I was watching a woman who was counting out ladyfingers or okra, and she was counting them into groups of 5 and putting elastic bands on them. And she was working so intently the entire time we were on this ride back to make sure that all of her vegetables and her herbs were organized and that they weren't wilting and that everything was ready to be sold. And I was just thinking about, how different her life is from mine and the things that I'm worried about versus the things that she's worried about. It's like, oh, how many likes am I going to get on this Instagram photo versus like, I need to organize this ladyfinger because this is like the way that I live, make money.
Yeah, I mean, so that's true. But then so we were sitting in a car there was a group of women who had loaded up stuff from the market, and there was an older woman who was organizing her okra on the train. But then 3 other local women who were with this group who had been to the market had their smartphones out and were watching videos.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, all of them are dressed in somewhat traditional style with the kind of makeup on their cheeks and typical Burmese style, but everyone's still got smartphones.
Yeah, that's been something that's been
so
really...
they were probably on Facebook too.
Yeah, it's something that's been really interesting about being here. I guess a couple years ago, the SIM cards were really expensive. It's expensive, like upwards of a couple $1,000s for a SIM card. And now you can get them very, very affordably. And so a lot of people have smartphones that are imported from China, and they're able to afford a SIM card. And I think it's probably really improved the lives of the people being able to be connected and that sort of thing. So it's interesting to see that, we're at this market that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. Not only can I connect to all the applications that I like at home, but these other people are sitting, squatting down or hunkered down on this train, and they're also checking their social media. Mm-hmm. And so from there, we took the train back. We stopped at a traditional tea house and had some traditional Burmese food, which was really good, and then made our way back. So we have come back. We're finishing up our final day in Yangon with some food, and we will check in a little bit later. So we are currently on a bus from Yangon headed towards the Golden Rock, which is, I think we're going to the base of the Golden Rock, which is Kinpan, where we'll change to a sort of like makeshift dump truck turned bus type thing. We've got about a 5-hour bus, I think, ahead of us, and I'm sure you can hear the music that's in the background. It's been playing the last 20 minutes as we've been on the bus.
Music.
Chanting something? I don't really know. There's something playing on a screen ahead of us, but I think we're both going to plug in to try and tune this out.
Definitely.
Yeah, are you excited about the Golden Rock?
Yeah, it should be cool. I feel like it's pretty hard to describe by words, but it's a really big rock that's been covered in gold paint, essentially, or like flakes, and then kind of turned into a pagoda sitting on the edge of a cliff, so it looks like it's about to teeter off, but sticks around on there. And is a really popular place for New Year's Eve, so we're going to go spend the night there before taking off somewhere else. But yeah, it should be really fun and really cool to see. I'm excited to just be on a bus and get out of the city and just kind of like watch out the window, the countryside. Yeah, and have a bit of an adventure. So far, things have been smooth. We took a taxi from our guest house to the bus station, waited at the bus station for probably close to an hour before we boarded our bus, and I think the biggest challenge thus far has been the not so sanitary squatty potty I used, but other than that, things seem to be running pretty smoothly. So we will check in a little bit later. The Golden Rock is actually called the Kiak Tio Pagoda, also hard to pronounce. It's a few hours away from Yangon and is probably on the tourist circuit, but definitely not a major item. We didn't meet many people at all who had gone. I don't think we really met like anyone who had gone outside of the people that we actually encountered at the Golden Rock, which I think we were like one of maybe 10 foreigners that were there. Yeah, and so it's quite easy to get a bus out from Yangon, and then you get to the small town near the pagoda. You get out, and they've got these dump trucks that have been converted into kind of, I guess, like buses. They've got these sideways benches in the back of the dump trucks, and they race up and down the mountain in death-defying fashion to get you up to the top. And so we were there on New Year's Eve, which is a very popular day for people to go and to worship at at the pagoda. A lot of locals go and appear to camp up at the top. We just kind of happened to work out with our dates, so I guess we got lucky in a way because we got to see this really cool event happening without really prior planning. But also, given the busyness, there was a lot of challenges involved, and finding a place to stay was a bit difficult. But we booked at a hotel up near the actual Golden Rock. And something that comes up in Myanmar is that there's a lot of cronyism involved in the business there because the government is still so powerful. And so only certain hotels can host foreigners. They kind of limit the supply and prices get really high. So we had to pay quite a bit of money to stay in one of these kind of it's a nice hotel, but just astronomically priced compared to what it should be given the state of the country.
Yeah, it was really interesting trying to find somewhere to stay in that area. There are definitely like affordable guest houses. They're all at the base of the rock. But we wanted to stay at the top because the last truck down leaves at 5 p.m., which is kind of before 5 or 6 p.m., which is before the sun sets. And so I had read that New Year's Eve is this day where thousands and thousands of Burmese people go up, they worship, they very different from, North American New Year's Eve celebration. It's very much about worshiping and spending the last day together with your family and, drinking tea and eating food, and people were camped out there. And we thought it would be really neat to be able to watch the sun actually go down. So we decided that we'd stay up at the mountain, but there's only like 3 hotels that you can stay at as a foreigner. And so it was quite difficult to actually find somewhere. I ended up finding somewhere eventually. I emailed through their contact page. I sent them money via PayPal, hoping that it wasn't a scam. And then we made our way there. So it all ended up working out, but I was definitely a little bit anxious about it, especially when I was booking while we were in Chiang Mai. It's so different from how I'm used to booking things like through Airbnb with reviews or through Hostel World, or I couldn't find anything anywhere to stay on the typical places that I use. I think I found one hotel in Agoda and it had like absolute crap reviews. And Myanmar is not the type of place that I would want to stay somewhere that has like a 5-star or like a 5 out of 10 rating and like less than 1 star.
Yeah, definitely.
So we ended up having a really, really great night, but we will check in with you and give you a bit more of an update from the rock. We've reached the Golden Rock Hotel where we're going to be spending the night tonight, and it's near the Golden Rock, but a little bit further than I'd anticipated. And so we take the trek for about 45 minutes to the top of the mountain, and I thought that where it dropped you off was where our hotel was. Turns out our hotel was actually 25 minutes back down the mountain. So we have now arrived at our hotel. We are both sweaty and tired and hungry, but we are excited to see the Golden Rock. Mm-hmm. And so we are going to go in search of some food, which might be interesting because there's not much up here. And then we're going to make our way somehow, either by truck or by foot, to the top of the Golden Rock to watch the sunset for New Year's Eve.
All right, it is the morning on day number 5.
28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, 1st. Day number 4. Yeah, day number 4 in Ryan's counting on his fingers. I think it's
January 1st, day number 5.
Okay, day number 5 in Myanmar.
Day number 5 in Myanmar.
Okay.
Myanmar. And we are at our hotel, slightly below the Golden Rock, getting ready to head out, but we want to recap the day yesterday. So the last time we checked in, we had trudged down from the top to the hotel, and then we hiked back up. It's about 45 minutes from where we were staying up to where the Golden Rock is. And just to imagine it, it's the top of a mountain has basically been taken over by... it's like one street lined with shops and restaurants, and then at the end of it is kind of this temple-y area where there's quite a few different kind of worshipping spots. And then at the very end, this gigantic boulder that's kind of lopsided on another rock that's been painted gold and kind of has a pagoda top stuck on it like a hat.
Yeah, and the Golden Rock has become a very holy place for the people of Myanmar. It is rumored that there's a hair of Buddha underneath the rock, and this single...
Well, it's not rumored, it's... Yeah.
Well, it's legendary. Or
there's a myth.
It's a myth that there's a single hair that's been holding the rock up. And it's really interesting to see the rock because it is sitting kind of precariously on another rock. Like, part of the rock actually hangs over the side. And yeah, I don't know much about engineering, but when I look at it, I'm like, wow, this rock looks like it could roll off at any point. Like, there's a part where you can walk kind of below it, where if it did roll down, it would basically crush you if you're underneath. And I was like, oh, I feel like a little bit hesitant to walk down here, even though, it's been there for hundreds of years and it hasn't moved. And many of the people of Myanmar, they go to the Golden Rock to worship for the last day of the year. So yesterday was the last day of the year, and it was crazy busy. We got up there, and the first thing we did was eat. So we ate like outside of the area where you would be, outside of the temple area, you could still keep your shoes on. So we had a great meal, and then we paid our foreigners entrance fee, and we began walking in, and we were immediately within a sea of people. So imagine as if you were at a really crazy sporting event, and there was people camped out on either side. They had set up sort of like makeshift
blanket tents,
yeah, using like bamboo poles to keep them up. It seemed like there was entire families, there's food, there was drinks. Everything was like pretty calm. Like, there wasn't a ton of noise or anything. It's just a lot of people talking and laughing and kind of hanging out with one another. And then we obviously made our way straight to the Golden Rock, and seeing it was up close was really, really cool. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, it's a big ass rock. And the crowds did, like, as you got closer, it got to be pretty intensely crowded. Just in the areas. So when you're kind of facing it, looking out from the mountain, you're kind of higher, and then below the rock there's another walkway. And we'll post pictures. This is the best way to check it out, is to look at a photo or two. But yeah, it's kind of like moshing around. And all these people who are going out to stick more gold on it. There's all these people who are kind of meditating and praying near there. And then, a handful of Westerners who are taking photos.
Yeah.
But it was pretty remarkable. Like, there's, I don't know, I suck at estimating. There was thousands of people up there, and maybe like 10 Westerners.
Yeah, and you could pick them out quite easily. So it's kind of funny. We had lots of groups of people who wanted to take some photos with us, because I think they come from remote areas and maybe have never seen foreigners before. And so that was kind of a fun experience for us, since we're not famous in any way. But we stayed for a couple of hours. We watched the sunset on the rock, and it was so cool to see the sky change colors, to see the rock change colors. And I mean, the viewpoint of the landscape from up there is in and of itself worth the trip, I think. It's spectacular from up there.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful view over, there aren't many mountains around, so you can see out over like the delta of the main river in Myanmar.
The Irrawaddy River?
Yeah, it's actually named something different now, but...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but as you can see that, and as the sun sets, it's a beautiful view, let alone the fact that there's this also big, giant golden stupa rock.
Yeah. Yeah, so after the sun had set, it became dark. I'm not really too sure what happened up on the mountain from there, because we made our way down. We had a really, really delicious dinner here at our hotel at the Golden Rock. It's called the Golden Rock Hotel. And then we went to bed, actually, before midnight. Both of us were exhausted from our trip yesterday, walking up and down the mountain a couple times. And yeah, I think I had one of the best sleeps that I've had in a while. What about you?
Yeah, it was good.
And so today we are taking the crazy roller coaster trek back down to Kinpan. We are hopping on a 12:30 bus, assuming everything goes to plan, to get us back to Yangon. And then we'll have a couple hours before we hop on an overnight bus that'll take us upwards to Inle Lake. So we're off on another adventure today. So after we checked in with you guys, we made sort of the reverse adventure as we'd had the day before. We had to take a different stop. So where our hotel was located was about 25 minutes down the mountain. So our options were to either walk 25 minutes up the mountain to where the main bus or truck stop was to get the truck back down, or to walk down about 5 minutes and then wait for the truck. So we get down, our hotel had written us out a piece of paper that said in Burmese, like, can you please help us get a truck back down to Kinpan? And so I handed the sheet over to the guy down there, and he kind of just nodded at us. And all these trucks were coming down, but none of them were stopping, or they would stop and nobody would like wave anyone on.
Because they were all full.
Yeah, they were all super,
New Year's
super
Day
full.
now.
And it was like thousands of people coming back down the mountain.
So much so that these dump trucks would have people hanging off the back. And like, this isn't like a pleasant ride through the country. It's like a twisty, turny, barreling downhill craziness.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we finally got waved over to a truck, hopped in like the very, very back of it. So we don't even have a seat. We were essentially squatting in the
where
very
the bags
back.
go, yeah.
Yeah, where the bags go. And luckily we didn't have big bags on us ourselves. We had left them in Yangon.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Oh no, we didn't even have big bags in Myanmar.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So that's another note, actually. We left our big bags in Bangkok, and that's one of the best decisions I think we've ever made traveling.
Yeah. Traveling without a suitcase and just having like a small backpack, so worth it.
Yeah.
It was kind of gross being like, okay, I've worn the same pair of pants like 8 days in a row, but so nice for situations like this where you don't have to worry about a suitcase.
Yeah, definitely. So we hopped into the back of this dump truck, kind of squatted, ended up sitting at some point, getting dirty, just like kind of a miserable but sort of exhilarating ride back down the mountain to get to Kinpan.
And it's scary too because we're facing backwards out of the truck. There's all of these trucks coming up and down the mountain, narrow road, and we're not in a seat. So you're thinking like, okay, if this crashes, like we're toast.
Yeah, I was kind of like, okay, if this truck like goes over, is there like any chance I can fly out safely and like land in like the cushy like canvas of a tree?
I was like, even if we get in a fender bender, we're gonna have issues. And the seats are kind of welded on in the back. So there's this row in front of us that probably has like 12 people in it.
It's creaking
so packed,
dangerously.
kids piled on top of people, and it's creaking. And I'm like, shit, man! If this seat falls back, we're in trouble.
Yeah. But thankfully we made it back down the mountain safely, back down to the town, and we just went to the restaurant where we were going to wait for our bus to pick us up to head back to Yangon. And fortunately, we were able to get on a bus that was
2 hours.
2 hours earlier than the bus we'd originally booked. And so we made it back to Yangon with plenty of time, and we arrive at the Yangon Bus Station, which is like not like any bus station you're picturing. It's essentially like a bunch of different stands with buses everywhere, people yelling, a bunch of taxi drivers who are all trying to take possession of you as a foreigner.
Yeah, and if you've ever played the game Traffic Jam, where you kind of have to shuffle these cars around because it's like there's like two open grids and you have to move the cars around to get one out. That's what the Yangon Bus Station is like. There's just chaos, no order, cars everywhere. Buses can't get in, buses can't get out, taxis are stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
Madness.
And we were a little bit delusional. We're like, so we have a night bus booked for that night at like 6 p.m. and it's like, I don't know, 1 at this point. So we have essentially like 5 hours to kill. We're like, oh, let's just find like a nice coffee shop somewhere in the city to go like hang out. And so just based on where the bus station was, we actually ended up taking a taxi to the airport and spending 5 hours at the airport so we could like pull out our laptops, do a little bit of work, maybe use some Wi-Fi, read our books, just kind of like take a breather, eat some like decent food.
But that was legitimately when you pulled out Google Maps and looked, where is there a cafe with Wi-Fi? You know, the airport was like the closest place.
Yeah. I mean, that just, and maybe it sounds a little bit like, oh, first world problems. And like, definitely we can acknowledge that that is like a first world problem. But at the same time, it's, you have 5 hours and
we
like,
just had some stuff to do.
Like, what do you do? Where do you go? It was like, legitimately, we were like, there's like 2 places coming up on Google Maps for coffee shops and the closest place is at the airport.
Yeah. And so something that's interesting about arriving at the bus station, I think it seems to be particularly a bus station problem in Myanmar, and it's just kind of an attitude that the taxi drivers bring to it. Is you get off the bus, and taxi drivers, I think, must have some sort of system worked out where they feel that they own the people coming off the bus. So you get off the bus, and one taxi driver will follow you around, being like, "Oh, taxi, how much?" And he's like, $10, which is astronomically overpriced. But then no other taxi drivers will serve you. And so what we did is we walked back through the office and out a back door, found a different taxi driver, and then he goes we negotiate with him, eventually get a decent deal. He goes to take us back around to his car and keeps putting all these caveats and craziness, oh, just wait 10 minutes, etc., etc.
We're like, no, we go now.
Yeah. And so turns out, I guess they have this system worked out. So the original guy who had been harassing us first comes over and he's pissed at us. He opens my door and he looks at me in the face and then slams the door shut on me and then starts screaming at our taxi driver. And eventually the guy who we ended up going with gives this guy money to, I guess, appease him or something. But
then we drive off, and we're just
one of these experiences. And you had the similar experience at the bus station in Mandalay where you're trying to deal with these taxi drivers, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, it was a strange experience, and we weren't really sure how to handle it, what we were supposed to do, what the protocol was. But we ended up making it safely to the airport, where we spent a couple of hours before heading back to the bus station for our first and only, our first overnight bus in Myanmar, and that was a 12-hour bus from Yangon to Inle Lake.
Yeah, and so we will end part 1 here and pick up with part 2 next week, where we're going to go to Inle Lake, Mandalay, Bagan, back to Mandalay, and conclude our trip in Myanmar.
Yeah, so we're going to leave you with a little clip as to what our 12-hour bus ride was like. So stay tuned.
So we are 20 minutes into our bus journey to Inle Lake, and we have made it approximately 30 feet in the gridlocked strip mall parking lot that is the Yangon Bus Station. This bus is it might have been nice in the 80s, but it is no longer very nice. AC doesn't appear to be working, and it feels like it's going to be a very long night on the way to Inle. To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.